Good morning, afternoon, and evening, wherever you are, and welcome to another NerdTube Highly Illogical podcast. And today I'm joined by my Trekkie in arms, Major Rage. How you doing?
Doing great. Excited to talk about this topic.
And our special guest this week, we have Neal Bilbe, right? I always say Bibble, and
Yes.
it's wrong. It's wrong every time. It's like, so I'm like, I was sitting there all this week going, it's Bilby, Bilby, Bilby. I'm like, not Bibble, Bilby.
Uh, or Bible, Blybe. I mean, you name it, you can butcher it.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, well, yeah. I mean, my name, yeah, I don't, my name's pretty straightforward, so I don't know if people can butcher it too much. But anyway, so today, Neal, he is with us from, he primarily works with the Avalon Universe. That's at least how we know him. He is the director of photography for some of the Avalon movies of recent years, dates. I think you're director on a couple of them, right?
yeah. I had a couple. I really started with Cosmic Stream. Josh had done the first couple of them in Kingsland, largely by himself. And then with Cosmic Stream, there was a turnover in crew and cast. And I just basically popped in because I've known Josh since junior high. And I thought, this looks like fun. I did that for a while. Then there was a bit of a hiatus, and I've popped back in for the last couple and have sort of moved, add my little spin. So.
Okay. So, just for the people totally not me, so what exactly does a director of photography do? I know a lot of us do guesswork, a lot of us do, like oh yeah, the director of photography takes a picture. Like I'm sure it's tons and tons more than that. So what would
Okay.
you, in your own words, say your job is as a director of photography on a project?
Okay. The formal definition is the head of the lighting and camera departments. And on a set, you have your camera department, which is the on union sets. Largely, it's a camera operator. You have your first assistant, who's responsible for building and maintaining. You sometimes have a second assistant who keeps the camera loaded, keeps track of footage, time code, that kind of stuff, and several assistants therein. And then you have a whole set of crew for the lighting department, which you have someone called a gaffer, which is generally the guy who the DP, director of photography, goes and says, "Hey, here's what I'm looking for. Can you do X, Y, Z?" And he takes those instructions, because there's sort of a weird bridge point when you get into this where you get a lot of artistic talk from the top, like, I want this to look moody and green, and I want the captain to really pop here. And then the technical side, when you start getting from gaffer on down, has to interpret that and say, okay, I'm going to need you to put, a green, a light with a green filter on it here, place that here, take we call it 650-watt instrument, place it over here so we get a nice side light, that kind of thing. And it's really the interpretation of artistic talk translated into technical direction for the lower side. Well, I say the lower, but the people who are lower in the ranks in the crew, from the guys who operate the lights to the guys who are responsible for providing electricity to the lights, etc., that kind of thing. So that person, the director of photography, is in charge of that whole crew from a functional perspective. They also set the look and tone of the movie or project based on the director's direction. The director and sometimes the production crew will come to him with an idea book where they'll take paintings and other materials and say, "Hey, this is what I was thinking. Can you make my show look like X, Y, and Z?" And we did that a lot on Cosmic Stream, and the one after, where we shot in the desert, where I went and I picked up different looks of what desert looked like in different films. And I went to Josh and I said, "Hey, of these three, can you pick one of what you want it to look like?" And I would go from there and find, okay, this is what he's thinking when he wants desert. Cool. Now I can take that and I can apply my own spin to it.
Okay,
So.
that's awesome. Just want to acknowledge a couple comments here. William Wells, I'm sorry, I cannot bring up your comment in StreamYard for some reason. It's not showing up, but I can see it over on the studio section of it. And so hello. Harris Films Production says greetings. And he says, "Hey, William." And some guy named
Hmm.
Zamario01. I don't know who this guy is. He says hello, guys. So welcome everybody. As we were talking about a little bit, we're going to kind of break into the tone and designs of Star Trek, of new and old. And I felt it would be a fantastic idea to bring Neal in to kind of talk about this, because he obviously has the eye for it. He's been a director of photography for several fan projects of Star Trek. He knows this stuff, and I'm sure as you said, you've gone to school and done stuff like that, so like what you're looking at, whereas somebody like me, who I'm just like pretty stars, like
I've found the difference largely being, Mr. Cheeto and Mr. Rage and the audience, when something's wrong. You can look at something and you get that weird look in your eye and you just go, hmm. It's the school above all else that helps you identify that and be able to sort of express it. But if you came to me and just said, I'm not liking this shot, something feels off, that's kind of on me to go to you and say, okay, so if I were to do this, if I were to bring up the brightness over here, would that make it better or worse? It's like going to the eye doctor. So things like that.
Number one or number two.
Exactly.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly what I thought. Mage, do you have any? Do you have any questions or anything before we jump into talking about more photography and Trek?
I was just going to say I appreciate learning more about the process. It sounds like you really have to combine. You're where the art and the tech intersect, and you have to be the handoff, the baton pass, as it sounds like, as it were.
An interpreter sometimes is a good term for that. Is how do I take something? We had this joke back in school where we had an audio class. The school I went to had multiple tracks, like career tracks within it. One of them was professional audio, like mixing for music albums, that kind of thing, and others had different tracks. And one of them, a notorious comment was, you get from a producer, I want that to sound more green. Exactly. Your face right there just said it. How do I make something sound green? What does that even mean? And finding a creative way to interpret some wholly unhelpful BS comment like that and turn it into something that makes the producer happy is an art in and of itself.
Sounds like a doctrine in and of itself. I mean, you gotta get your doctorate for that almost. I don't even know what I want half the time. I don't know how you can figure out more. And Ginger Greek is in the chat saying, yes,
yes.
The green sound, the bastard cousin of the brown noise.
Yes, E flat -4 if you're ever curious.
E flat -4. Okay, I will roger that. So I'll start off with kind of just a broad question, but for everybody. And if anyone in the chat has any questions for Neal, please, feel free to ask. But I'm going to start it off with the basic B. What is your guys' favorite Star Trek look? Like, which show has your favorite look? Like, DS9 has a certain look, Voyager has a certain look. I feel like TNG and Voyager have similar looks, but maybe I'm wrong. As I said, I'm not but what Star Trek show has your favorite look? And I'm going to start off, and I'm actually going to say my favorite Star Trek look is Enterprise. I really feel like did I steal it?
You stole mine. That's mine. I want to hear if it's for the same reasons, though.
Between sets and tone and everything, like I've said on here many times before that, I like Enterprise's, it's very claustrophobic on the ship a lot of times. It's very submarine like. It's definitely not your big airy corridors like on the Galaxy class or even the Intrepid class. DS9 had some pretty compact places too, and that's probably my second favorite is DS9, just the darker tones with that. But Enterprise really struck me well. The uniforms, like that look really kind of like that merger between astronaut uniforms and kind of bridging into the Starfleet style uniforms ish, the jumpsuits. And yeah, I love DS9 as a show, but I feel like the tone of Enterprise and like the grittiness of it and just like the the greenness of it, because they were kind of green out there in the you know, in the area. It just felt like that for once the Federation was on the back foot. You know, they weren't, you know, so that's kind of the tone I got from even just looking at the ship and looking at the interior. It felt like they were kind of actually exploring uncharted areas where they were very uncomfortable. So I don't know if you guys have any follow-up thoughts, or if Mage, you want to jump in with your thoughts. I mean, I don't want to steal yours. So was it the same or was it different?
No, it's the same reason. I mean, and like you said, to add on what you said, it does a really great job of invoking the feeling of being kind of in that tight space. The way it's shot, that it's great at eliciting an emotion via the way the shots set up and the lighting and stuff, the atmosphere, and the, like, maybe the ambiance. I feel like hits high notes that just speak to it being a culmination of that era of Trek production.
Harris.
I'll echo some of your thoughts, Mr. Cheeto. Is that it was an interesting thing where it was technically in the timeline of Star Trek, it occurred before the original series. And how do you do a show that occurred like 50, 60 years after that show occurred, but still play homage to the show that's coming later in the timeline? And for a while, it did sort of trip over its own feet, worrying about not screwing up a lot of things to come. But they're also in an interesting revolution in my world as well, because the first couple of seasons were shot on film. And then for the last season, they started shooting with digital cameras. And that's a very interesting change and evolution in how the images were acquired. And that changed how things were lit and workflow and things of that as well. You know, and to your point, yeah, it had a very submarine-ish look because we couldn't go to the big hotel in the sky that was Next Gen, which was done purposefully to take it from, okay, we know Star Trek, the original series from the TV show from 1966. We also know it from the movies as well, because we've seen the Enterprise in 5 previous movies and then one to come during the production of Next Gen. And we've gotten used to it. We understand that language. And then we wanted to depart from it and say, hey, here's the future. And this is what we think the future will look like. And it had a very beige-ish tone that was reflective of the technology of the day, in the fact that the 60s were very, very bright. They used very bright colors to say, hey, color TV is new, and we want to show off how wonderful this color TV is. So they would really punch up the saturation, hence the bright red, the bright blue, and the bright yellow, sometimes green uniforms. And they would choose that on purpose. So it's very interesting. And yeah, according to Harris Films here, one of his comments is that he was active duty in the Navy for 20 years, and it does look right. I understand that. And yeah, it looks very gritty, very realistic. And it's always a fascinating thing to look at that and look at the set designs for that kind of thing. I grew up with Next Generation. Like, that was the first thing I remember really watching as a kid. I mean, I'd seen some of the original series, but I was 7 years old when Next Gen premiered, and being able to watch it as it happened kind of has an impact. And then, you know, DS9 was the follow-on show, and it had a very different look. It wasn't noir like the original series is. The original series is like a film noir, but with color. And that's something Josh likes to talk about from our side, and how that looks and how that feels and things of that nature. Voyager, again, was somewhat of a continuation of Next Generation, because of the set politics that were going on the show between the crew from DS9 and the crew from Voyager. They kind of had, there was some interesting set politics going on there, and it looks very much like the predecessor show because they used a lot of the same sets, they just painted them. And they did some really cool work. You can see, I sent a link, and if we wish to share that, it's called the Set Blueprints Set Archive, and it's available from a wonderful website called archive.frogland.co.uk, and you can look that up.
Let's say I can
And you
put
can
in the
see
chat.
that.
I'll also bring this up. Was there anyone in particular you wanted me to bring up to look at?
Not particularly at the moment.
Okay.
The viewers at home probably make an easier job of this, is just looking through them and seeing the similarities between the Voyager sets and the next gen sets. And yeah, oh boy, there's some beautiful ones in there. And it's really cool to see that. So yeah, as he's digging through those. And Enterprise was a redress largely of the original series sets because they moved them around a bit and used them to rebuild movie sets more correctly, because there was quite a bit of a space between the original series and the first set of movies. But again, each of them has sort of an interesting reflection of their time. And when Next Gen started, they went for a lot of dark mahogany and tans and silvers, a silver on like the panels, and that had a very unique look. It didn't quite look quite as good as it should have back in '87, but yeah, you can see some of the plans and some of the models that they make for, but largely for determining camera angles and things like
I'm going to
that.
try to make this a little bit bigger. Hold on. So nope, that's not the right one. That's not the right one. I'm trying to find one of the things that'll make it big enough. I mean,
If you
no,
click
that
on
one
any of
needs.
the photos, there's a little window that pops up top, and it makes it about as big as they possibly can.
Where are we talking about?
Click on any of the photos, and it will make it. There you go.
Oh, I meant
See
like
at the
make it
top?
bigger, like make it bigger on
Oh,
the stream. So okay, but
yeah.
this is pretty good. We got this. We got 3 out of the 4 corners. We're good.
There you go. So yeah, you can see some of the detail they go into when they design these things, and yeah. Yeah, some fascinating plans, and you can see the call outs there for the A, B, and C for elevation plans that they have in the middle of your illustration there. Not quite sure what piece that is or what it goes to, but anyhow, oh yeah, something for Voyager.
Yeah, this was
So
the astrometrics for Voyager. I just went into the first one. And
nice.
astrometrics obviously starting today, but you can kind of see like they even made the wooden models,
Mm-hmm.
of the sets and everything like that. It's really cool.
Yeah, a lot of times they'll take small cameras and we'll use that to somewhat plan out different shots and make sure that
You can
where
see
they
the little
set them.
person right here. Look at that.
Mhm. Yeah, for scale.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, really neat. And because if you're going to build something like that, that's going to stand from, I think, Voyager season 5 maybe on through season 7, that's 2 shooting years of having that set. So you got to make sure you build it once and you build it right.
Oops.
So,
Ooh, the Med Lab.
Yeah. Not sure quite what series that is, but
It's a wrap.
Like I said, there's some really fascinating things. Oh, there you go, Voyager.
What did I do? This is something I went to zoom in on it and it took me to a totally different screen.
The joys of web pages.
I know, right? What were we looking at? Okay, sick bay. That was the one I kind of wanted to look at.
Yeah,
because sick bay is very. I always like the sick bays on Star Trek. They're always very. They're always. I don't know how to. They're very daunting. I don't.
Right.
Like it's like a hospital. Like you walk in a hospital and like somebody who's like fears like hospitals. Like it's just sick bay is very daunting. It almost feels like sometimes.
Yeah, white coat syndrome, that kind of thing.
I mean, I don't usually have that, but I can see it. Like
yeah. Now in Next Gen, on the first season, they would redress the conference room to be the sick bay, and they would just put carpet over the back windows. It's the same set. They just moved some set pieces because they were limited on.
Sick bay is the conference room.
Yep.
I never knew that. I'll have to go back and look and see.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah, same set.
Huh.
Yeah, and then it changed in third season when they moved to bigger sound stages.
Okay, so the first 2 seasons it was okay. I'll have to
Yeah.
go back and look. I don't remember that at all. I just remember the normal sick bay, the one the one we all think of,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when you look at the bio beds when everyone's laying down, you'll notice that the windows behind them, even though they're covered with carpet, are exactly the same as in the conference room.
Huh.
So
nice.
So I mean, if all they had to do was redress a set, yeah, I think that looks like that's Deep Space Nine there. And what's really neat about
No,
that particular
this is
shot.
Voyager. This is Voyager. I think it's the mess hall.
Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah, you see, I was thinking about the hallways having that shape. What I really like about this particular picture is it shows you the relation of each of these sets as it fits within the soundstage. Because all that stuff on the exterior of the photograph there is the soundstage.
There we go. Little bit better.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to get a good I'm trying to get a good just a good view for people, and so you guys can see it well too.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's Voyager down here. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but
stage 8.
Yeah.
Stage 8.
Yep.
So Neal, we'll come back to this in a minute. Neal, you never answered. What would you say your favorite Trek is, like aesthetically, tonally, set wise, like just all of that combined? Like, you are the professional, so I'm interested to hear what you have to say.
I think tonally, and when it comes to its look, I really like, and please nobody crucify me for this one, I like the way Strange New Worlds looks when it comes to a set, because I think it looks like a hotel room in Dubai, is what I think it looks like. It's got the whole Emirates Air feel to it with luxury materials and built really well. Is it appropriate for a starship? No, not in the slightest. It looks nothing like a real starship would. But like I said, at least from a design and material standpoint, I think it looks freaking amazing. Of course, half those sets are what they call augmented reality or virtual, where they have LCD panels that they use with images projected and mapped based on the camera angle, and they extend the sets that way, because they're not actually building all of the sets that way. There's some great shots of the crew lounge area where they go and they shoot. And you can see some behind the scenes material, behind the scenes shots of what they're doing, and you can see where they have the LCD walls turned on, and the image looks wrong because the camera it's not the actual set camera, it's the behind the scenes camera, and it doesn't line up properly, and it sort of gives away the gag. But overall, I think that's one. But the most realistic is either going to be Deep Space Nine or possibly Enterprise when it comes to more realistic. Again, Voyager, I'll give it some credit because, again, that's a redress of the next gen sets, and it all looks very next gen, meaning that it's very bright and very flat, which is sort of the TV aesthetic of the day. Our TVs weren't capable of producing that range of contrast and have it still look good compared to cameras and televisions of today. So I'll give them a little bit of a pass. The original series was kind of a hot mess in and of that, because that was 1960s trying to do the best they could on an absolute shoestring budget, and it sort of set the groundwork as things to come. But no one's really ever matched that aesthetic well until fan films, because everyone looked at it and went, yeah, the 60s, we don't really want to do that again. So,
well, and I mean,
like
when you have a full budget, I don't blame Strange New Worlds for honoring the past, but yet still making it look present. Like that's my thing with Enterprise, is like, I get it. Like, there in no conceivable way should a show that was made in 2001 need to look like it came out before 1966. Like, you have to suspend. And I mean, I think they did a fantastic job at honoring, like, finding that real middle ground between like making it still look like, we're still struggling with the technology a little bit, but but we're still going to lead up into TOS. But I still feel like Strange New Worlds did it right, where it's like, okay, we are going to honor the past, but we are also going to make this look nice and pretty as we can. But I don't think they're doing TOS a disservice by anything that they've done. You know what I mean? Like, based on the sets and stuff like that. So I really feel like that Strange New Worlds is a great. And I know people are like, people get up in arms about, how is it going to go from looking like that and then change to how it looks in TOS? And it's like, really, guys, like, we're really having this conversation about how is a show made in 2022, whenever it debuted, no, 2021, 22, 21, whatever.
Yeah,
Like,
somewhere.
how are we going to have a show that comes out then, and then we're going to try to shoehorn it, making it look like the this 1966? No, let's not. Let's pretend like we're adults and this is a TV show, please. You know?
Art, I mean, art has
Absolutely.
it has to evoke the sense of a thing, the concept of the idea. And so naturally what we think of the future looking like is going to evolve over time, and it's not going to match up. That vision of the future from the 50s and 60s is completely different from what actually ended up happening and what we have today.
Yeah.
Or a vision
Well,
of the future.
this is a good example of that.
Yeah.
We don't have flip out communicators. I got a bloody cell phone that can do better than they thought it could. So,
Yeah, I mean, when Kirk was sitting there playing with the dial on his communicator, he was actually playing Angry Birds. Like, that's what he was doing.
Oh yeah, I hadn't thought of that.
He's like, yeah, let's get he's actually, it's not Angry Birds, it's Angry Red Shirts. He like sits there and he like pulls the red shirt back and flings the red shirt right at the Gorn.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, Angry Gorns.
Yeah, Angry Gorns. All right.
Yeah.
Paramount, call us. Oh wait, no, Skydance, call us. We have ideas.
Right. So
go ahead.
I think one of the things to look at is some of the design language they use with when you had the original series, and you can kind of see this when we go to the sets. One of the things, the first time I came to the set, when we were shooting at Glenn's place for it's Warp 66, we were shooting there, and I looked at basically the big control panel for what's up, dude? Yep. Big control panel for the helm, and you could see they were like marbles cut in half for like some of the touch buttons and things. And I thought, the sets that they built for like this for like Enterprise, you can see little tiny labels on the buttons themselves as to what they did. If you zoom in real carefully and look at that, they weren't using cut in half marbles, but they were using something similar. It was still touch buttons instead of being, touch screen LCD stuff like you would see later in Star Trek V, which went away for Star Trek VI and then came back for Next Gen. So
I really always felt like the little bubble buttons, like they're what are those things now the kids have nowadays where they're all formed and they got like the bubbles that stick out and the kids like push the bubbles.
Oh, fidget spinners or something equivalent.
No, not fidget spinner, but like they got the little punch thingies, like where you push the bubbles in.
It's something like ADHD. Something or other. You can do that is to somewhat occupy your mind and
So that's what it reminds me of. I watch them push those and I'm like, oh, so that's where it came from.
There was a fascinating interview I saw the other day on YouTube where Adam Savage of Mythbusters fame went and talked to the Okudas, Denise and Michael Okuda. And he was talking to them about, because they were part of an auction that was auctioning off various pieces of Star Trek memorabilia. And Michael had a story where they were shooting in Carrot Farpoint, and it was Marina's first day, and she sees this Counselor Troy sees this big panel, and she's somewhat stressing a bit, saying, "Oh my God, what buttons do I push here? Because I don't want to get this wrong." And he says, "Marina, it's the future. Everything is divined by software. So this panel is laid out exactly for you. You can't push a wrong button." I just sort of went, okay, I like that. Like that a lot. And this is 1986.
I was about to say, that's a very futuristic thing for them to say in 1986. That's kind of crazy.
Yeah. Well, it answers the question for any Star Trek fan filmmaker. Don't ever tell your actors you must hit this button.
Yeah.
It's all the buttons are correct. Just act. Don't worry about that.
Well, and I love, I remember talking to Frank from Phil Ferrick Productions at one point. He said he would tell his actors, he says, don't always be pushing buttons. Like if you're always sitting here doing this, it doesn't look genuine. Like hit a few buttons, put your hands find a spot to put your hands on the side where you can rest them for a minute. And then if you're given a command, then, or every now and then just reach your hand up, hit a button or two, but don't be like sitting there like this because it doesn't look very genuine.
Yeah, if I'm sitting here typing on my edit controller here, and doing that all the time, it's going to look like I'm trying to type at a typewriter instead of actually doing genuine work.
Yeah.
So,
So that's what they're doing. They're trying to look busy.
yes,
I see
that's the
you gold
secret.
shirts in Next Gen. I see you guys.
Yeah. Oh
Ops
no,
is just
Riker's
trying to
coming.
look.
Look busy. Yeah.
Yeah. Here comes Riker. Look busy. Data's like, I am busy. Shut up, Data.
We call this one Mr. Radar, and this one is Mr. Coffee. Yes.
Oh man.
Yeah, you got it.
Spaceballs, yes. Okay, so just another general question. Favorite bridge set. So mine. We'll start, Mage. I'll start with you this time. Or do you want me to come back to you?
Come back to me.
Okay.
Let's
I
see
mean,
if
I
you
can start off. It's not fair because I've kind of been thinking about these questions. So I'll go first to let you guys kind of ponder. My favorite bridge set is probably the Defiant. I mean, I've said this before. You've got a Tyler.
Yes. Yes.
Oh, I didn't know I was on camera.
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So you're still on camera there.
All right.
What a hand.
Yeah, my place is the zoo.
I love the I love, as I've said with Enterprise, I do love, it's kind of like it's a good command center. It's tight. It's kind of like as I've watched Frank Parker Jr.'s bridge set develop, in when he's built that. I love that bridge setup. If I were to create a fan film, I would use that bridge setup because I like that tight quarter command center. Like it's not huge. They don't have all this extra space. You've got panels on the wall that you're using. You do have your stations along the side, and you've got your one console in the front, but it's not like spacious like a lot of the other things. Even I feel Enterprise was a bit not as spacious as most of them, but still a bit spacious. They had a whole conference table in the back of the bridge. It wasn't in a separate room, so there was definitely a little bit more. But I love that tight space of that command center. I was like, oh, and Cisco, man, just commands that bridge, or Worf, depending on who's in the chair.
Did you like the holographic matrix thing they had for the episode for the uniform?
Which one was that?
That's the one where Cisco chases after Eddington, and you see it's so they could give Avery Brooks and I forget the actor's name, the guy who played Michael Eddington. It would have looked weird had they had their argument on a view screen, but instead he's right there on set with them.
I always figured they did that just because, it was a style choice, not a style choice, but like getting him physically in front of him.
Yes.
Yeah, I always did, because you never see that technology again, really. No. Like, I mean, not really. At least I don't think. I think
there's a reference to it. There's a reference to it in the season of Discovery before they found out that Strange New Worlds was going to be a thing. That supposedly the reason Captain Pike came on the Discovery is because they tried that technology on his Enterprise and it messed things up. So there's a throwaway line in the series in the episode where he's like, it's going to take weeks to get that crap off my ship, kind of a thing.
Yeah. No, I see why they did it, because they wanted them to be right. And good, like it was good. Like I love that episode. I can't believe I didn't realize what episode it was. The Eddington stuff honestly was so good in DS9 compared to, I really felt like they should have dedicated a whole season, not just a couple episodes to it.
Yeah, they're sort of I can see how they were setting up, the whole thing with Voyager was setting up the Maquis for DS9, or DS9 set up the Maquis, and the Maquis sort of set up Voyager for DS9 so they could spin it off. And then, you wound up with that, some elements like that popping back in, which, they brought the Maquis back obviously as a through thing. And then they sort of got onto this Dominion War business in DS9. And there were some really amazing episodes, such as I'm going to butcher this, but it's the episode where Bashir goes to Romulus, Inter Einem something Legis, I forget, or my absolute favorite one of all time, which is...
well, that was a Section 31 episode, though, wasn't it?
It was, yes. And then there was, In the Pale Moonlight.
Oh, well, I mean, everybody knows that one from...
Yeah, that I think is prime Star Trek right there. And I think that was the peak, at least in my opinion, is where Star Trek sort of peaked. And you had things like First Contact from that period that all had that feel to it, and you're just like, "Woo, damn, man!" And then it's just sort of, did its thing, and here we are now.
Well, I
But
mean, in a wrestling term, I don't know if you ever watched wrestling, but it's kind of like the Attitude Era. Like that era of Star Trek was like the Attitude Era. Like it was
Yeah.
peak Trek. Like it, like just like the Attitude Era was peak wrestling. Like right then it's like that like latter half of DS9, the middle of like Voyager, when when First Contact, and I'm gonna say it, Generations. I'm sorry, I like I know that it was a bit earlier, but I like Generations. I love what they did in that movie.
I thought what they did were they took the next gen sets and relit them. I thought sometimes the lighting was a little harsh, where they're at the Armagosa star, and they're getting blasted from the side with that orange light. I felt like that was a little harsh, but overall, obviously they were trying to separate it from the TV series, so it didn't have that flat 1990s look to it.
But it's kind of crazy. Like, why would you? Like, because that's what people want to see is their TV show on the big screen.
Yeah. I think the best example of that by far has to be Matt Lettieri, who's the DP on First Contact. And he's the guy I try to emulate. That's who I look at and say, I really like the lighting, where they do the interesting, Hollywood sense. Whenever I'm lighting something, I want to make sure I have a good rim light that's nice, and it's at least what we call one stop or one lens stop over exposure of the lit side of the face. And then, there's a stripe right here in the middle of the face where you let things go darker to create modeling and dimension and things like that. And I will let that sort of dive a little bit in the shadow. And that's the First Contact look. And I try to incorporate that kind of stylistic lighting. I even tried a little bit today, but my primary light's bouncing off the wall in front of me a little too much. But maybe I could flag it. But yeah, maybe a little bit there. There we go. Somewhat like that.
Mm-hmm.
There's the dark stripe here. I don't have a backlight on me, but I thought set wise, I like the First Contact set. I really like what they did, where instead of it being a big window, kind of like it looks like in Next Gen, although there really wasn't a physical window there, they make it look like a holographic projection.
Mm-hmm.
There's a shot where they arrive at the Battle of Sector 001 at the beginning of the film, and you see Data and Hawk in frame, and then you just see the view screen sort of materialize. Yes.
It's like the holodeck. It gives you that holodeck feel, yeah.
Yes, I love that. And I'm like, that's the coolest thing ever. And then it's blue screen from there on out. But, why they don't do that anymore and they just leave it set like that where it's just pure stars all the time, I don't know. Kind of drives me up the wall a little. But I thought the set design, because, the Sovereign class Enterprise E, we got to see throughout the next 3 movies, although I got to say Nemesis is probably one of my least favorite movies. I like that bridge design. It has a certain element to it I like. It's got one of the things as a director of photography that you're responsible for is finding a way to create dimension and depth in a 2-dimensional medium. Because this medium that we're talking to on right now ultimately is a 2-dimensional medium because it's on our monitors. And how do I do that? I wind up making the background darker than me. I add a little bit of color where, that contrast with the skin tone that I have here. And that helps somewhat separate me from the background. It creates the illusion of depth. And having darker background and more colorful background, I think helps sort of do that. Although probably less, this is a little extreme, but then again, I'm playing around. And I thought the sets for basically First Contact and the lighting they did really stood out from a production perspective. I thought for me, that's probably the creme de la creme. DS9 has its unique look to it because they sort of went a gold and a brownish, tannish gray look because that was a Cardassian built station.
Mm-hmm.
So it lacks the sort of the grays and the blues of the Federation that you see on things like, the Defiant, for example, or the Runabouts. and they wanted to create that contrast between the two. So
Yeah. DS9 feels like it's constantly falling apart. Like it's a like, but they get that grittiness. They sell it with the types of shots and the way they light it, and just the use of color. I feel like DS9 has some of the best use of color as far as colored lighting goes.
I love the gritty of DS9. I love in the Emissary Part 1 when they get to DS9 and it is literally falling apart. It's like, but I like that where it's like, dude, they are really walking into a shit show, and Miles O'Brien really has to earn his stripes. Like, and he does. I mean, he every single day that station is falling apart, and the only thing that's keeping it together is the duct tape of Miles O'Brien.
There's a great episode in the first season where they discover that the wiring is being chewed by Cardassian voles.
I remember that episode.
Yeah, and they pull this rubber, obviously a rubber, vole out, because Miles phasered the thing. And apparently Quark was using them for betting down at his bar. And then there's a humorous scene, obviously at Quark's expense, where they came up with a way of driving them away by creating this ultrasonic pulse, which of course, they have fun at Quark's expense because it temporarily deafens him because of that. And I find that to be amusing.
Oh, absolutely. Anything at Quark's expense is funny. But yeah, no, I love that episode. That's a great episode. And yeah, it's almost like the Tribbles, but like rodents, like
right.
And probably more damaging because I don't think Tribbles really damage.
It depends on what you're looking at, because if you go by the parlance of the short trek, the Tribbles are actually kind of vicious. And also an episode of the second season Star Trek Prodigy, where they have mutated Tribbles in there and they actually wind up, attacking people.
Well, there was an assault Tribble on the Daystrom station. I was like, it said assault Tribble. I'm like, what the heck is assault Tribble?
Right.
I'm like, that's a weaponized cuddly right there.
Yeah. It's kind of like a fully automatic Care Bear. You're like,
oh my god, fully automatic Care Bear.
Yeah.
So
Class 3 NFA status.
Okay, is it me lagging or is it you guys lagging?
I detect no lag.
It might be me.
Hmm.
All right. Well, if you guys can hear me fine, that's fine. Mage, do you have any questions, like, just into like what, in regards to like cinematography or anything like that, like in Trek or for Neal himself or?
No, I'm having trouble coming up with one, to be honest. No, he's so good at explaining things that, like, you've covered the things I wanted to ask. Like, I was going to ask, like, how you came up with, like, kind of your look, and you pretty much explained it all already.
Well, here's a good example of the looks and the styling that we wanted to go for. We had a couple of examples of when we did the ship being without power and basically being in the cosmic stream for that episode. It was, asking what would a ship look like without power? Well, that's pretty obvious. It looks like that. Basically, it's black. That's not entertaining to look at. So what we do, let's drop the power. Let's make sure it looks like it's dark, but we always brought up the backlight to help separate the subject from the background, so they stand out. One of the interesting things I overheard, or one of the things I heard, is on the commentary for a comedy movie, an animated comedy movie called Open Season. I think it's a DreamWorks animated movie with Martin Lawrence and Ashton Kutcher and all that fun business. But they're talking about how they did their scenes, and scenes where a character was front lit, the backlighting is always dim. But when they were backlit, when the lighting behind them, would create a silhouette of their character. So again, it was separation. We had an instance where we shot the next film with Pixie and then everybody else in a cave. No, yeah, it was the next film with Pixie and Jennifer Rader in a cave. Now that cave was literally 2 walls at someone's basically out storage building, essentially is what it was, out in Mountain Home, Arkansas. And depending upon where we put the rocks and how we put the camera and where we hid the lights, it was always, okay, so where are they entering and exiting from? So naturally, if you're in a cave, there's going to be light coming from there, but not from here. So that was an interesting experiment. And how do we show off, how do we make it look like a cave without making it look like it's, essentially paper mache, which is always the fun part, trying to hide imperfections of the set without exposing them via the light, which is another interesting thing that we go through.
Sounds like a dance, like a very delicate dance you'd have to go through.
It's one of those fun things. You're right. A dance is one way of putting it. Another thing is kind of like, okay, I put the camera here. We have people walk through the set. We look and we check, and then we watch and we make sure nothing stands out as like, oh crap, I see that, or oh boy, there's a hell of a seam right there. And then maybe we change it and we make sure that change didn't create other changes. As somebody once said, if your boat's sinking, you don't want to add more rocks. So one of the things I've always found is that lighting works better when I take lights away and not add to it. Because I was working
that's always our inkling, is to try to add something to fix it.
Yes.
Whereas sometimes less is more. You're right.
Yeah, I worked at a TV station where I wouldn't use the term rival, but a person in a similar position to me down at the other station, because we're in a split market where we have 2 major cities separated by a mountain range, and the person at the other station would put up a light. It would create a shadow because 3-dimensional objects create shadows. And his first inkling was, okay, I've got to fill that shadow in. Let me go put another light in over here. And he wound up chasing shadows until the whole thing was so overlit. I think Josh described it as Christmas at Walmart. Yeah.
Christmas at Walmart.
Yeah. It was something. It was magical. That's for damn sure. It looked like absolute, hammered, what, but you could kind of see where, to your point, adding and adding and adding, at some point it's just going to break. And knowing, and that's kind of what film school does for you. Above all else, 1, it's a place to meet people, and 2, it's a place to make mistakes. And mistakes are wonderful things because you learn from them. And it's great to make mistakes in that environment. I don't make mistakes
ever, so I don't know.
Oh, well, as I like to say, I'd rather make a mistake and learn something than to never make a mistake and never learn anything. So, and boy, have I made some doozies in my day. And yeah, that's the trick is, again, that's the fun thing about fan films too, is it allows you to play in a fairly consequence-free environment. It's not like we're going to blow up $20 million or anything like that because one shot got screwed up, kind of a thing. And there's some fun in that. Sometimes it requires extreme creativity to get the look you're wanting. And sometimes that can really push your medium and everything else way beyond your comfort limit and technical capability too. So
I just want to kind of run through a couple comments here. I know I've been neglecting the chat and I do apologize, but okay. So we'll start from here. Okay, so Harris is saying that Enterprise was before the Federation was founded, but I agree with Cheeto. Yes, that's why I said Starfleet, not the Federation. I do remember seeing that when it came up. Zam says Disco Bridge was freaking massive. It was. I did not. Okay. So let's bring up our least favorite bridge. Mine is going to be Disco because I feel like not because it looked too futuristic, but because there was so much space and it just didn't need that much space. Even TNG had a sense of, like symmetry, whereas the Disco Bridge just seems like it's gaudy to be gaudy.
Yes.
So
it's big for the sake of big because, oh my God, look what we can do. And on all the other sets, the important thing to remember about the bridge is it's a set for actors to act in, and we need to know where the actors will be even when they're not on shot. There needs to be a sense of space and reference. So if we're back at Next Generation, for example, we got Mr. Worf at the horseshoe. You know, if Data's at his seat, he's going to be up and to the front, and there's a sense of space. I don't really get that, and somewhat, you know, the Strange New Worlds Enterprise bridge bleeds off from that a little bit. I like the built-in set lighting. That's something we can do now that they really couldn't do effectively back in 1986. They started incorporating that into somewhat a DS9, but they really couldn't. Then they started really doing that sometimes with Voyager, but it really took off on Enterprise too. One of the neat things about Enterprise is that most of the bridge, most of their lights were on tracks, and those tracks were automated. So, you know, if you know, Scott Bakula was standing at a certain position, they could move his lights. They could have them automatically move, aim, and point down, and then they could recall his lighting preset. And they could do that quickly, which was an interesting thing that they could do.
I can't imagine managing all that. Like that's why I'm just like, oh my God, like I have a hard enough time managing my light right here,
Yeah.
let alone a light for every actor.
I don't have movable lights on my rig at work in our studio, but we do have dimmable lights, and each light has its own address. It's not as it sounds very complicated, but once you sort of get used to it, and it's like, okay, that's light 53 because you have a little tag on it that says 53. Trust me, that's the only way you can keep track of what it is. And even on a set where things aren't moving left and right, everything has to have a number. So that's kind of how you do that.
Mm-hmm. Did you guys want to add any of your least favorite bridges? If you don't have them, it's fine.
I'd say
What was that, Mage?
I said I'd say Voyager.
Really? Why is that? I don't mind Voyager's bridge that much.
It's not that I dislike it, it's just I like it the least. It's just a function of them trying to be so similar to TNG that it feels too similar to TNG. So
if I might, I'm going to counter you, not disagreeing with you, but more counter you, because I always felt like Voyager's bridge was a bit, it felt the same. You're correct, like tonally, but they had different stations that were set up way different. Like they only had the one console for Tom. They had ops and tactical. Well, tactical was always behind, but ops and tactical had their own like little cubicle. And then engineering eventually had their own little cubicle to the side. If it's your least favorite, that's fine. But I always felt like that tonally, yes, it did feel kind of the same, but stylistically, it actually felt very different to me. And that's, I kind of liked Voyager's bridge a little bit. I mean, I didn't love it, but so I don't know. I thought that was interesting. How different people, different strokes, different folks.
The one I would say is definitely the modern, anything in the modern Trek. I feel like it doesn't have, it's more of a, hey, let's make it big for the sake of big.
Mm-hmm.
And again, like I said, I like the integrated lighting as sort of a nice thing to have. Plus, if you really know what you're doing, it creates interesting anamorphic lens flares and things like that. But, beyond that, it's, again, it feels, it doesn't feel like someone put a lot of time and planning into it. And it's more like, hey, we've got millions of dollars to build a bridge, but there's a certain amount of thought and energy that goes into the older stuff because they didn't have all of this money to throw at something. And they had to be really efficient with what they thought. And there was a lot of planning that went into it because they're thinking, okay, well, if this needs to last us 7 years. This particular set piece has to last us this long. And we need to make sure it's worth it because we aren't getting that kind of money again. So you see there's a lot of thought put into it where I feel like the modern stuff is just, something's wrong, throw money at it, or we'll fix it in post.
It's what I call like the Deadpool effect is like, Deadpool 1 was such a low budget movie, but it was so good. And then like you look at Deadpool 2, and not that it's bad, but it's like you can see like they got money for that second one, couple more comments here. I want to start with Harris here down at the bottom. Least favorite bridge is a JJ verse. I agree. I don't like the Apple story either. I wouldn't say it's my least favorite, but it's definitely same problems as Disco. Just too gaudy.
Busy. Too
Yeah.
busy.
It doesn't need everything doesn't need to be busy. And Josh Irwin saying, "Hey guys, I'm in a meeting for another project, so I can't listen live. But Neal is an expert. He's the smartest person I ever know. And when it comes to cinematography, he knows his stuff. You know what? I hear that, and that's why I'm kind of like, man, we should probably have him on the program. You know, we should have this Neal guy on the program sometime. You know, so
I hope it's worked out. I hope I've said something interesting.
Oh my god, you've said tons of things that have piqued my interest. I love it.
Sure.
This is what I wanted. I wanted to I want to dig into, all that and talk about all the fun little nuances of cinematography.
Sure.
Okay.
We haven't even gotten into my other great passion, which is color grading.
Well, if you want to talk about that for a couple minutes, I mean,
Lord, that again is the wonderful art of essentially taking what is shot, and surprisingly enough, it doesn't look like what you're seeing now. And most of the time nowadays, it's shot what we call a log profile, or a very flat look. Everything looks washed out and gray and muted. And that's done for a purpose, which I don't have time to get into here, but taking it back and then bringing it back to normal, and then being able to adjust the colors and create that feeling, because that's what it's really all about, is creating that feeling in the audience so they can suspend disbelief, believe that they're in an alien world or the future, and be able to create that look and sell it to your audience and move forward. And again, it's another tool in our tool basket to tell a story. And that's really what we're doing here. Is at the end of the day, we're all telling stories here, and we as a species collectively like to tell stories, and that's one of the things that sort of weaves us all together across culture and creed, is we tell stories.
Even back in the original Homo sapien. I mean, we're
Our
we
original
drew
histories are oral.
Yeah, we drew stories on walls, like, I mean,
paintings in France.
Mm-hmm. Like that's it's one thing that links us all to good stories, telling stories, our own stories. You know what I mean? It just, so yeah, human race is a crazy little thing, isn't it though? Like
Hey, it's the only one we know.
That's true. So far,
Quote
yes.
Carl Sagan. Well, yeah, that's a fascinating subject to look into and see. Are we alone in the universe? Probably not, considering the size of the bloody thing, and how common elements are, et cetera, et cetera. We just don't have any evidence of, at least any official evidence of, and that's a debate for another time, about communicating intelligent life. We don't know anything about that. So, or at least not officially.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, I don't expect our little corner of the galaxy to be like Star Trek, where it's like you do have like, I mean, there's at least 150 races in the United Federation of Planets, and then that's not even including, obviously, all the other races that are surrounding, all the other races from the Klingon Empire, Romulan Empire, Cardassian, and any of the races that they've subjugated. Like, because technically the Klingon Empire has conquered many races. Now, whether they genocide did them, or they I'm losing the word, you know what I mean, but
subjugated,
yeah, like subjugate, or they just wiped them completely out, like eradicated, yeah. So, but no, I agree with you, and that is a big topic. I would love to talk about. I do have on my list one of the topics to talk about the races of the races of Star Trek, and like. I don't know where I would. The only reason why I haven't brought that one up is like, where would you go with that? Besides talking about the Andorians and the Tellarites and all, like talking about all them. Yeah, that's great. Talking about the cultural, differences between all of them, even though it's made up, like their cultural differences and everything. But like, that's a topic I've just always kind of shied away from, because I'm like, what angle do you go at that from?
How about this one? While they are alien races per se, as a storytelling device, they're a way for us to express either our better facets or our worse facets. If you look at the original series shot in the 60s, the Klingons were basically an analog of the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm.
The Romulans were an analog of the Roman
Actually,
Empire gone
Zam has
astray.
a good point that they actually remind him more of the Mongolians, right? Was it the Mongolians, or was it?
Or maybe,
Allegorically, it's the
yeah,
USSR, and kind of allegorically, the Romulans. Always seen them as a stand-in for China.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. With obviously, Plant being Romulus and Remus, the two founding members of Rome. So there's that element to it.
That
Klingons have
connection
sort of
for
a
sure.
Viking-esque element to them as well. An
Mhm.
honor society and very much into edged weapons, that kind of thing. So, and again, we look back at all of those races again are ways for us to explore our own nature, and it's
Ooh,
fascinating.
the way Star Trek races explore our nature. That's the angle. You did it, Neil.
Well, thank you.
I'm gonna have to have you back for that one. That's gonna be awesome.
The smartest Trekkie we know, Neal Bilbe.
Guys, you gotta get
You
out more.
almost said it
That's what I
too.
told Josh the other day. Man, you guys gotta get out more if that's the case, because I am not the smartest person.
I mean, I don't even know how I make it through most of my days.
Well,
All right,
nothing fell on my head today.
all right, gentlemen. Well, we have reached the hour mark, and we usually try to wrap it up there. Neil, thank you so much for being here. We would love to have you on anytime that you're willing to come on again. Sure. Especially talking about Star Trek races, that would be fantastic, or anything else. But you are always welcome here, even if you just pop in one day and you're just like, I'm going to join you guys for this topic. You're more than welcome to join us. But Mage, thank you very much for being here as well, being my co-host, my friend.
I wouldn't miss it for the world.
I know. Zam would have been here, but
tired.
he's getting some burnout. So he just said he was gonna take the night off, and I said, go for it, man. Like, deal. You gotta rest. You can't burn the wick at both ends. And Zam puts a lot of effort into this channel, doing all the.
God, yes, he's a workhorse.
He is a workhorse. So
being 6 hours ahead of us doesn't help.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah, it's late as hell there.
1 a.m.
Josh also says Neil and I often meet and break down films before we shoot. He often has great insights and makes great shot suggestions. Well, I would hope so. He's your director of photography. But no, I believe it.
Good job, but
yeah. And then Harris Film says, "Good show. Nice seeing you, Neil."
Well, thank you, Harris. Thank you very much. It's been great talking to all of you guys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Harris, for keeping up in the chat. I know I didn't get to all your comments, and I apologize. But Josh, thanks for stopping by. Nerdiverse, thank you very much for being here. Zam, Ginger, thank you very much for staying up a little bit. Daniel Vance. Oh, I missed a comment from Daniel Vance. What a son of a bitch I am.
That's criminal, Cheeto.
It is criminal. What design elements / materials sound good, but in practice are difficult to make work on the screen? Do you have
good question?
Well, when it comes to budgetary wise, definitely doing anything that's extremely exotic, i.e., plasma. That's a really hard thing to pull off. Anything involving, LCD walls and things of that nature are hard from a technical perspective right now, mainly because of lighting and how we expose our film, expose our imagers, things like that. Things that are extremely noisy are generally poo-pooed upon. I don't like using styrofoam for that matter, because I hate the sound of styrofoam rubbing together.
Oh yeah, I hate that too. I don't like drinking from styrofoam either.
Well, it's a good insulator, I'll give it that. But if you rub those two pieces together, I will leave. So that kind of a thing. So that's a lot of now. We in the studio, basically in the motion picture industry, make flats from what we call Luan, which is 1/8 inch thick, basically plywood on a frame. And in the stage world, like theatrical stage, they use canvas stretched across that. So, Luan is more rigid and that kind of is more rigid and easier to paint, that kind of a thing. But, canvas, can be used, but I would really strongly suggest you don't, because it flexes really bad and that will give the whole shebang away on camera.
Okay. Sorry, Daniel Vance. Yes, one question, and I missed it. Damn it. All right. But everybody out there in YouTube land, thank you very much for joining us here. Again, Neal, thank you so much for being here. It was a blast having you here. I love talking about all this. I'm sure we could do a part 2 on this topic because I'm sure we just scratched the surface. And I love doing follow-up podcasts. So we'll talk about that also. And yeah, also tell Tyler we said hello. He's been peeking in behind you a couple times. So
I'm sure he's had a couple questions. So
that's right.
All right, guys.
All right. Well, everybody, this is NerdTube, the greatest YouTube channel you kind of maybe sort of heard of. Please like, share, and subscribe, and we will catch you guys in the next one. Peace and long life.